And here we go. All right, so thank you again for everyone for joining today's virtual meetup. We are halfway through our series. This has been a great interactive kind of experience for everyone, so we really appreciate everyone jumping on again today. Today we'll be talking about the advanced capabilities of HA and DR in the Google Cloud specific to SAP workloads, so hoping to have a really great interactive discussion together. Just a few housekeeping notes for some new folks that are jumping on today. All of our microphones and cameras are on, so feel free to ask questions after Nick starts presenting here, but we really want to make this as interactive as possible. So please just mute yourself when you're not talking, and then we will get to your questions and interactions after Nick is done presenting. Nick Milicic is our facilitator today. He is our Director of Senior Solution Architecture here at Managecore, and he will be going into a little bit of a deep dive regarding HA and DR and talking and answering any questions that we have on the phone. So take it away, Nick.
Thanks, Kristen. Hello, everyone. Just get the slides going here. So today I'll be talking about HA and DR in Google Cloud. I'll give a high-level overview of the different nuances around architecting for HA in a public cloud versus your traditional HA architecture, and then kind of give you an overview on how you can actually use the benefits of GCP to get you a much more resilient HA and DR solution for SAP. Okay, so going into HA and DR, if you think about it at a high level, if you're used to the type of architecture that you deploy in maybe an on-prem solution, HA, you're always thinking, use a clustering solution such as SUSE clustering, or maybe you're going to use Windows clustering. And there's specific ways to do it for SAP, specific ways to install SAP related to that. And then when we talk about HA, we generally talk about in a singular data center, we have two disparate servers where we have SAP running on, and in the event one fails, it can fail over, and that is, again, on-prem, that's generally in the same data center, and then DR would be at a different data center, generally in a different geographical region, so maybe that is 100 miles away, maybe it's 500 miles away, but DR would be more replication-based than a technology like a clustering solution, and that's what we see on-prem type of solutions. Well, in GCP, it's a little different. You can actually have better redundancy, and you almost have to think of it in a three-prong approach. In GCP, you really have what we would consider zones and regions, right? So zones are different physical data centers located in a single region, and a region is a different geographical location. So that would mean that you would have 3, 4, 5 data centers in Oregon as an example, and then that Oregon would be the region. You'd have different zones within that region, so different physical data centers. Google actually has the backend infrastructure and the technology to think through doing HA between different zones. So what does that mean? That means that you can actually do HA technology like SUSE clustering or Windows clustering that you normally would do in a singular data center on-prem. You can do it between multiple different data centers in GCP. So your HA almost becomes DR in essence, right? You have two physical locations where you're spanning HA. And it's all because Google has the ability to, one, provide the network latency required for that, which is their back-end infrastructure, their backbone, that they, it's their own private network. And they have technologies such as Elastifile or NetApp solution that you could purchase through GCP, where you can have shared disk within a single region and even multi-region shared disk. So that underlying layer of disk for that HA configuration is actually done across regions, or sorry, across zones. And what that means is that shared disk is actually being spanned at all times across two different data centers. So if you think about that, because of the ability to do that, you can actually cover HA and DR scenarios. So that being said, in Google, you also have to take into consideration that architecture for Google versus on-prem. In Google, you want to take care of the ability for failed and availability for a zonal failure, right? So if a data center fails, you want to be able to replicate or have a solution that protects against that. That's the most basic type of protection you want. And if you're comparing on-prem versus GCP, zonal failure is your most common failure, right? In kind of the context of on-premise, that would be a data center failure. That's all anyone ever protects against, generally in a private solution. The difference being is a regional failure in GCP will equate to what you would kind of consider a true DR, which is if a data center in Oregon failed, it would move to a data center in Iowa. But in GCP, you want to architect for both to be as highly redundant as possible. So what Managecore generally recommends is providing an HA solution within a single region with multiple zones. That way, if a zone goes down, you still have protection. And then if the whole region went down with multiple data centers, you have the ability to fail over to a completely different region for DR. Now, for DR, you really have two options. One is to use, if you're using HANA, you can do HANA system replication. So you can have a standby database there replicating, and that database will take over in the event of a failure. You'll have to restore a primary app server, but once that's going in that data center, you can then have the database already standing there waiting. And it reduces load time, right? Because HANA is in memory. So what that means is that for that time that the server would spin up, it does take time for all of that data to load back into memory. So having a system, a warm standby sitting there will get you up and running faster. But then you also have the ability in GCP with multi-regional cloud storage. We actually prefer that method because it does reduce overall cost, but still gets you the ability to restore your environment very, very quickly. Backend within GCP allows for you to connect your HANA backups directly to cloud storage, and that cloud storage being multi-regional will allow you then to restore in that different region with very little effort, right? You just use backend to call the backup and restore it. And the multi-regional cloud storage also allows you the ability to replicate your backup automatically without any extra effort to multiple different regions so that you can have that assurance that if that whole region went down, you can just restore that environment very quickly. There's no extra steps you have to go through to make sure that that data is replicated to multiple different sites. So it is a very, very robust solution. Again, made part in the fact that GCP has that availability. They have the products such as Elastifile. They have the products such as multi-regional cloud storage, and they've laid their own fiber, right? So that is key. The latency is always going to be critical when you design HA infrastructure and the communication between those environments. And that network is what plays the most important part. And it's very unique to GCP, which is why it's a great platform to deploy SAP on. It is just a far and ahead without having to architect a lot of different ways to provide that connectivity and low network latency. GCP has done all that legwork for you. You really just have to set it and forget it for the most part. It's a very robust solution out of the gate. Now, again, talking through HA and DR, you definitely want to make sure you architect it right from the get-go. You do want to make sure that you protect yourself from zonal failure and regional failure. And that is something that is a new concept to people when they go from a private cloud or a on-premise solution into a public cloud like GCP, right? Your common train of thought will say, let's protect against a data center failure. And if you translate that to a public cloud, that means zonal failure, right? Because a zone is a data center. What you have to also protect against is the fact that that whole region could go down. And GCP allows you to do that, but it is in the way you architect it. So if you're summarizing the HA piece of that too, again, when you think of HA in a private cloud or an on-premise solution, HA is still in that same data center, no matter what, right? You're going to deploy a Windows cluster or SUSE cluster in that same physical data center location. And what I'm saying is that GCP allows you to actually deploy that across two different data centers. And it's like tackling HA and DR in one fell swoop, right? You've now protected yourself against a data center failure and have the technology to make that happen using HA, which, again, in a private solution is not the case. You don't have that network resiliency and latency to be able to do HA across physical data center locations in general, right? There's always the exceptions to that. So again, a very robust solution, and Google lets you do that right out of the gate, right? It's all on how you architect it, but the tool sets are there. So you can get very, very low RTO, RPO using these tool sets. And here you can see a slide just around the regions and zones. So as I mentioned earlier, you can have replication, multi-regional replication. Generally, it's relegated to the same kind of geographical continent. So multi-regional, you're really going to relegate to the US as an example. So it'll be around the US. But you can see in there some region and zone makeup here. The blue and the white are really where the regions are, and in there you'll see numbers, and that is how many zones are within that region. So Iowa, as an example, has the number 4 in it. That means there's 4 disparate data centers in that region for you to be able to fail back and forth to before you have to even get out of that region and go into, let's say, Northern Virginia. So very, very redundant infrastructure. And it's something you want to make sure you think through and talk about as you're deploying into GCP, right? You want to make sure you have your data centers geographically dispersed enough that you meet any requirements you might have for your organization. So maybe Oregon and Northern Virginia are the data centers of choice because you need at least 500 miles between data centers for DR, as an example. So all those things you want to take into consideration when you're deploying your SAP solution in general, but then as you get into HA and DR. And here's a slide real quick around how you would do that in a specific zone or a specific region. You can see here in one region we have 2 zones, Zone A and Zone B. HANA's replicated. This is not the app layer. You can do the app layer as well. This is just for simplicity's sake. We're going to talk about the HANA database, but you can see here I'm actually doing clustering using SUSE clustering between 2 different zones. And remember, zones are different data centers. And then you can see here that it's all within one region, and then I can do a third replication or a second replication, but a third system in a different region in case both of those zones went out and the whole region went out. So this is a visual on basically what I was talking about earlier around replicating your environment between data centers and between physical geographical locations. A little bit on the high resiliency architecture, again, a different way to see it. You can even see on the bottom, you're taking it to cloud storage. A little update on that is that cloud storage is multi-regional. So that cloud storage is going to be across everywhere in multiple regions. So you don't actually have to do anything to make that happen. You just have to pick the right product. And depending on what database you are, you either can take it directly to cloud storage, or you would have to use a 2-hop method where you take it to persistent disk and then you take persistent disk backups to cloud storage as well. Backend allows you to go right to cloud storage without that persistent disk hop. Databases such as ASE, which is fairly common here in HANA deployments, to have an ASE environment as well. You would generally take that backup right to persistent disk and then use some sort of method to copy that to cloud storage. Okay, I will kind of open it up for any questions anyone might have. So if there's any questions that that anyone has around HA and DR, please let me know, and I'll be happy to answer them.
Great, thanks, Nick.
Nick, this is Frank. Just curious, what do you commonly see for deployment of HA and DR? Because obviously there's a lot of options that you can deploy. What's the most common thing that you see, or most reasonable deployment of HA and DR for an SAP customer?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So most common and standard architecture are definitely two different things. You definitely have to take into consideration how complex you want an environment to be and how complex it is to manage it. Because the more you add in HA and DR, the more complex it gets. So Managecore kind of has a unique position on that. When it comes to standard architecture, everyone's going to say you want to cluster it in two different zones. And let's take HANA as example. You do SUSE clustering in two different zones in the same region, and you use HANA replication to make that database replicate. And then you have another standby database in another region, and that's replicating over there. That is the most common config that is presented. However, in the real world, we tend to not see that config as much because, quite honestly, DR is already provided by that initial replication for HA. It's almost doing the same thing between two different zones. So the most common config that I see deployed is going to be a SUSE cluster in the same region between two different zones, and then what you'll do is you'll have backups to multi-regional cloud storage into a different region. So you won't have that second hop into a different region with a standby HANA database. Generally, that's not required because you're fulfilling that need with the HA solution.
And then do you see people doing the same thing with the central instance of the SAP application server, or is there different technology for that?
Yeah, so central instance is done a little differently. You can do clustering between different zones, just like you would for the database. However, that does add complexity. So what I generally recommend to my clients is you use live migration, which we talked about a few virtual meetups ago. But that technology actually allows you for very, very quick failover should something happen to that hardware in a single zone. Okay, so what that means is I run my SUSE cluster for HANA, and I'll run the database in zone 2 as a standard architecture, and the standby will be in zone 1, but then I'll run the ASCS instance in zone 1, and that allows me two things. One, I don't have to configure HA and have the additional cost and complexity associated with it. And live migration will allow you to spin up that server still in zone 1 should a failover happen in that specific zone. Now, you do have to be cognizant that if that whole zone failure occurs and you have to move your ASCS to zone 2, it is a restore of that environment. However, it's only a restore of the ASCS instance. So you're talking a 15-minute restore of a backup of an image of that server because it does not hold data. It's a very small server. You restore that server in zone 2 and you're back up between 15 and 30 minutes. So generally that is and will meet requirements for virtually all our clients. For the clients that require that 5-minute failover, that's when we would probably deploy a cluster of the ASCS instance between two different zones. But in general, I just recommend using live migration from GCP and not having the overhead of the additional cluster.
Great. Any other questions?
Yeah, hey Nick, it's Carl. Maybe touch on the cost benefits from doing this kind of HA DR solution compared to the on-prem. And what are the cost savings?
So when it comes to cost, if you're doing it on-prem, you're generally going to have to architect a solution where you buy some third-party product, especially for the DR case. If I'm doing HA in a single data center, I am going to have double the amount of hardware, right? I would probably recommend that it's leased in a different rack. And if that's the case, the hardware associated with it, you need twice as much hardware just to be able to support that. And then when you do DR, it's that third-party solution to make that happen. Now, whether you do that via a SAN replication technology or some third-party product that handles that, there are a lot of moving pieces to that. And with moving pieces, there are a lot of additional costs. So in general, it's going to be more expensive to do the similar solution on premise because of the overhead. With Google, it's just basically inherent, right? You're not having to buy more products, you're just having to deploy the right ones to make the solution happen.
Great question. Any other questions? Well, I had one, and you briefly kind of touched on this, but how really does Google Cloud differentiate itself from the other public clouds in specific to SAP workloads? And I know we kind of talked about that a few slides ago, that it was kind of purpose-built for SAP, but any other talking points about that?
Well, I mean, in relation to HA and DR, they differentiate themselves in the fact that the solution I presented allows you to do this HA and DR without having the complexity that some of the other public clouds have of the configuration, right? And I can't stress the network latency enough, and I can't stress the ease of use of some of these products enough, because to do these in other clouds, you have to do some sort of copy method, as an example, to get a backup to multi-regional cloud storage or the equivalent in a different cloud. In GCP, it's just inherent, right? You pick the product and it does it. Same with network latency. You have to architect that in the other public clouds to make sure that your network latency is sufficient between zones, because those other clouds don't have their own private network. And that's why I stress the latency is key when you talk about HA and DR. And because of the private network, it's a big differentiator in that aspect, because you're not having to architect or engineer or protect yourself against network latency issues. That is just inherently taken care of with the GCP platform.
Great. I think that's all I had on my side for questions, unless anyone else on the phone has any questions or anything related to SAP in the Google Cloud. We're happy to also answer. We have a few more minutes. All right then. Well, just a reminder, our next virtual meetup will be on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, the 21st. We'll be talking again about SAP Basis Managed Services, basically the automation of all of that and how we're able to do that via Managecore's Watchdog. So Nick will be doing a live demo at that point of Watchdog, and we'll actually get into the system. So it'll be probably a little longer, maybe a webinar style meetup at that point. But again, open to questions, and we can have a live and interactive dialogue. And again, just a reminder, all the recorded sessions are available on Managecore.com. The live link is there, but you can go to our homepage, and the link is right in the first banner. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself. My email is there, ktanner@managecore.com. We're happy to answer any questions. I can get you in touch with Nick, Carl, or anybody else on the Managecore team. So we really appreciate it. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks. Yep. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.